Hello and welcome to American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy. Welcome back to another week where we try and find out what is going on in my home country. And this week we're joined by another expat, although he's been an expat a little bit longer than I have, Michael Goldfarb. Michael is a journalist with the BBC, formerly NPR. He's got his own fantastic podcast called First Rough Draft of History, where he has a look back at news events that he has covered or other people have covered over the years. And journalists, as they like to say in the podcast, sort of like think of themselves as writing that first rough draft of history. And that's the idea of that podcast. And he also has a great Substack as well to check out, which he was saying to me is a lot about what's happened in Gaza and Israel over the last few months, but covers other subjects as well. So Michael is a proper journalist, not a comedian, but political geek like me. So he's covered elections in the US and still keeps a keen eye on what's happening there. But what's nice is that we can also give it that British spin and see how those things are affecting the politics and the mood and the times here in the UK as well. So it's great to have him back on the podcast. And so please enjoy Michael Goldfarb. I'm very excited to welcome back to the podcast you, Michael. As if I'm saying your name as if you don't know what your name is. It's great to have you back because the last time we talked was all the way back in 2021, where, and I
Wow.
believe in the UK, where we're both based, that was about 17 prime ministers ago.
Almost. I mean, it seems like that. And do you remember how you were taught to share in kindergarten? Everybody gets
Hmm.
a turn.
Yes.
The Conservative Party is like that now. It's like an enormous kindergarten. Everybody will get a turn on the front bench. Just wait, Nicholas. It will be your turn soon. Actually, not soon enough because they've got to have an election soon. That's what has to happen soon because otherwise, I think we're all going to die trying to comment on what we know is going to happen on election day. You know,
Yeah. Which the Labour is going to sweep to power unless there's a revolution that's been started by George Galloway, who just won a by-election in the UK, which for those of you listening in America, how would you describe George Galloway without saying something libelous?
he's the ultimate left wing grifter. He is to left wing politics in many ways what Donald Trump is to right wing politics. He found a
Yeah.
party. I mean, he did. I'll say that there may have been a point in his life when he was a sincere, hard left
Hmm.
kind of guy,
Yeah.
but basically, he just likes to mess with people, and he also likes attention. Total
Yeah.
attention whore. He'll sue me for that. He's a total attention whore, and he's from the far left. Does Russia Today, Press TV on Iran, and whenever there's a constituency going and a by election coming up,
Hmm.
and there's some kind of unpleasantness going on in the Middle East, if the constituency has a sizable Muslim population, he turns up and runs for parliament and he wins. I mean,
Yeah.
if he was on the, you know, in other contexts, Edward Said would call him a white savior and an Orientalist because he understands the misery of the downtrodden Arab masses better than your ordinary Muslim from the Middle East. But that's where he comes from. And you know something? You know, this is the man who infamously met with Saddam Hussein in
Hmm.
1991 after he had invaded Kuwait and was
Yeah.
about to be thrown out of Kuwait by the combined forces of America and Britain and a few others. And he on television, he knew it was being recorded, said, "I salute your indefatigability, Mr. Hussein, Mr. President." So this morning, when the results came in from Rochdale, I I salute the indefatigability of the voters of Rochdale in returning this guy. It's like the third constituency he's been in the last 15
Yeah.
years. It's it is ridiculous, and he is a white savior. You know, I will tell you. And because of the war in Gaza opens an opportunity for this kind of demagoguery
Yeah.
in very particular um, constituencies in the UK.
It's a fascinating feature of UK governance because we've both been here for a long time, and that you can just be parachuted into an area and suddenly represent them. Whereas in the US, that's carpetbagging, you know, Dr. Oz tried to run for senator in Pennsylvania, but everybody knew in the last election they lived in New Jersey, and that cost him votes. Like you have to be from a place to represent that place. But here they shop around for the easiest place to win. If they need the person, if they really, really, really want the person in parliament, they find a person. Or in this case, as George's done, he's found the protest vote that will fit his background, and then he'll just go, "Yeah, I want to represent you because I care about your issues now." And looks at his hand to go, "Rochdale, that's where we are. Is it Rochdale? Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, it goes a little deeper than that. This is for American listeners, as opposed to people in Britain who know this story. Is that Labour? This should be a Labour seat, safe for the
yes,
Labour Party, and they selected a Muslim candidate. I think the constituency I've read is roughly 40% Muslim, and find a someone who is Muslim to run. And then he gets tape recorded at a constituency meeting saying some pretty dire stuff
mm,
about Israel in relation to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Now, we may or may not want to lose your entire audience by talking about Gaza and
yeah,
have me labeled a self-hating Jew and all the other crap that goes with it. But I mean, it's very hard at the moment to find a way of creating sympathy for what Israel is doing in Gaza. But this
mm,
candidate for the Labor Party went there, and in this tape recording that was leaked to the press, he said some pretty hellacious things, and so he was deselected by the Labor
yeah,
Party. And then up pops George Galloway a few weeks ago saying, "Oh, here's one for me to carpetbag. A
right.
collection. I've got a collection of carpet-bagged seats. He's got all of the
Mm.
T-shirts from the various constituencies."
Yeah, I mean, well, it's been a problem for the left in the States. It's been a problem for the left here. So, I mean, we might as well touch on it a little bit because it is affecting Biden's reelection campaign and the results from the Michigan primary that just happened earlier the week of us recording this. Um, that there was 100,000 people who voted, quote unquote, uncommitted in the primary because he did actually have two other people running. So uncommitted beat the other two people, one of whom's campaign was suspended at the time, who's now reinstated her campaign. The other person who has been running a protest campaign against Biden, but Biden still won 80% of the vote.
Yeah.
But the uncommitted vote was led by a large population of Arab Americans that live in Michigan. Um, do you think this is going to be a problem for Biden? The fact that now the left is, because when I left America 20 years ago, there was really no pro-Palestinian movement in the American left or the right. It was everybody was pro-Israel because we didn't have there weren't a lot of Arab Americans, I think, in the US at the time. And also with media and everything else, we've become aware of the situation in Gaza and lots of other reasons why it gets attention, I suppose. But it wasn't an issue. But now it clearly is.
Yeah. I mean, just to say, I mean, I think that some of this is you're now into probably I'm never sure how to count first generation, second generation, but in the Arab American community, you now have
Mm,
people who have been born in America. So they're Americans,
yes.
they're not
Yeah.
immigrants, and are aware of their political power. And because in America, politics is very often played, via ethnic, I won't say games because, the history of an immigrant country like America is that the best way for a new population to make their voice heard is to ultimately elect people to Congress, and so people vote
Yeah.
for their own, and then you get to another stage of integration 3 and 4 generations down the line, like Jews, and you have different criteria. You're worried
Mm,
about your tax burden more than you're worried about, the fact that, you want to have a Jewish guy representing a Jewish neighborhood or an Arab
yeah.
person like Rashida Tlaib, who is part of the squad and is from Michigan and who was leading this uncommitted slate in Michigan. Now, I think that it's hard from this distance to say. I think
Yeah.
that it you would, all things being equal, you would say it's not going to make a difference. All things being equal, you would say it's the 1st of March as we speak. And if this thing that's going on in Gaza is still going on in the autumn, then all bets are off.
Yeah.
Wars shouldn't last that long. There's too
Mm,
many international actors with a certain amount of stake in the outcome, or at least stopping it. Okay. But as we saw yesterday, you had this terrible incident where more than 100 people were killed in the northern part of Gaza at a food distribution point because aid has been getting in very slowly. Now, events like that always happen, or the potential for that exists every day when
Mm.
you're in this kind of conflict. Anything that can go wrong eventually will. And if something really, really terrible happens, and you would think, well, 112 people being killed is really, really terrible. But the potential for even worse things to happen exist in this particular conflict.
Yeah.
Then it might well have a really negative effect on Biden's chances. And then you come down to, and this brings us to the more general questions about the presidential race. Biden's chances are entirely dependent on Donald Trump being the Republican nominee.
Mm.
The people are I think that the majority, just as in 2020, actually, when Donald Trump lost, anybody
Mm.
who's MAGA and has somehow floundered,
I,
stumbled into this
yeah.
podcast. What are you doing here? What are you doing here?
I think it's a
And
safe bet. It's not happening.
Donald Trump lost by 7 million votes.
Yeah.
And now, thanks to the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court in Alabama, ruling that an embryo in an IVF freezing facility is a human being with the same rights as you or I. Women have no real final say over their reproductive processes. That's what's going to elect Joe Biden.
Yeah.
He's too old to do the job. You know it. I know it. Doesn't mean he isn't capable of doing the job, because
Mm.
he's doing sort of okay. Certainly the domestic stuff that he has his hands on the levers of power. The economy, he can nudge it this way, he can nudge it that way.
Mm.
He can project a certain kind of rationality that the other side just doesn't do anymore.
Yeah.
But the real thing is that Donald Trump is going to get Joe Biden elected. If he
Mm.
were to drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow, and look at the guy,
Yeah.
possible. If he woke up tomorrow with a really bad stomach ache and it turned out that it was stage 4 cancer, which given his cheeseburger diet is not impossible,
Mm.
then Joe Biden is in trouble. But so long
Yeah.
as Donald Trump is the candidate, Joe Biden's going to win. Doesn't matter what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah. I think so. And I think as people wake up to, because the people who I have on this podcast and myself, we're following this and have never stopped following it. But the average person doesn't pay that much attention. And I think once they start to look at the choice, I, I'm assuming they'll come home. And I think even in the Arab American community, or for those that care about the plight of Gazans, and and I've traveled. I've never been to Israel or Gaza, but I've been around the region before. I know you've been around the region before. Um, I would assume that at some point, I guess, because I'm a lefty, but I'm not a super passionate lefty, if that makes sense. I'm a rational left. Like, if you believe in supporting the people of Gaza, voting for Donald Trump is not going to help the people of Gaza at all. Biden in American politics, considering how much pro-Israel U.S. is overall, resoundingly, Biden is the best person they could have right now as their advocate.
Mm, absolutely. And this is why, in spite of George Galloway's win yesterday,
Mm.
and in spite of the daily barrage from The Guardian, former newspaper, now, junior common room political handout sheet, in spite of that, come election day in this country, even Muslims will get, what's the choice? A government returning the Tories to power yet again with their, really blatant Islamophobia.
Mm.
Again, how much help can you give the opposition? This week in British politics, the Tories went full bore Islamophobic. Now, I got a lot of problems with Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, but mostly to do with the way he screwed up the streets. I mean, look, you may ride a bicycle. Don't take offense. I don't. I'm past 70 years old. I've got two fake knees. I'm not getting on a bicycle on the streets of London. And it really bothers me as someone who has to take buses everywhere
Mm.
that so much of the city's streets, and also as someone who drives occasionally, about 1,500 miles a year, not a lot. All right, it's a 20-year-old Volkswagen Golf that barely meets ULEZ standards. And I can't afford to buy another used car. I'm done. If I fail my MOT in May, I'm done. And all of this is because of Sadiq Khan, and I hate him. But having said that, I don't think that London is Londonistan, and I don't
No.
think that he's in the pocket, as the Tories have been saying, the Tory newspapers, Tory politicians,
Mm.
that he's got Islamists pulling his strings. That's
Yeah.
insane. And if you want to win, and I don't think the Tories do, I think basically they all want to lose. That's why so many of them are not standing again
Yeah.
for Parliament. They want out, they want to rest. It's tiring to be the majority party.
It's
They want a nice sinecure, a think tank. They want
yeah.
to use they want to collect all the IOUs. We voted for that legislation that allowed you to have this business and not pay any taxes. Now, I'm leaving Parliament. Will you put me on the board at 100,000 a year
Mm.
for 2 days a week of work? All the corruption stuff. They need it. They need to cash that out. But they're helping. And what they're doing is they're neutering or neutralizing the Gaza conflict as an
Mm.
electoral issue. Because in the end, who will Muslims vote for? Like the rest of us, they just want to be rid of the Tories. And you know, that's not me showing my political cards and
Yeah.
who my team is. Just reasonably and rationally, who are you going to vote for? We just need to be rid of this Tory government.
That's what's what I mean, because a lot of, there's so many parallels between what happens in the US and what happens in the UK and the trends that follow. So then the, why then is there not any rational it seems like there's some rational thought here, and it's clear that Labor are going to take power because people I guess maybe because they're exhausted of the Tory leadership for the last however many 15 plus years. But in America, it does feel like we're still on a knife edge. That the party that is openly autocratic is openly anti immigration, is anti woman's choice. They easily could have be in power again.
Yeah, well, that has to do with the most important outmoded feature of the Constitution, which
Mm,
is the Electoral College. If you look, if you went to a straight direct vote for president,
yeah.
you know, when the Democrats win. They
Mm,
won in 2016 when Trump became president. They
yeah.
won in 2000 when George W. Bush became president. They won the popular vote. Even without Florida, they won the popular vote. But because of the Electoral College, suddenly Florida becomes the pivot state and puts George Bush over the top.
Mm,
And because of the Electoral College, the fact that Hillary Clinton won by nearly 2 million votes means nothing because she lost Michigan.
yeah.
And well, she was going to lose it. She lost Ohio easily, but she lost in the Electoral College. And that can't change unless you alter the Constitution, and you can't alter the Constitution without 2/3 majority, and America is split down the middle. You're just never going to get to that 2/3 majority in anything where you can report out from from the Senate and the House of Representatives, the amendment, send it around the states. It's just impossible. And
Mm,
so they are able to um, keep us, a country that is badly split, badly split.
yeah.
Even though MAGA, I don't know. I've not seen good numbers that I trust, but I wouldn't have thought more than 30% of the overall voting age population is really MAGA.
Yeah.
And
That
that's
hard
enough, though.
right.
That's
Yeah.
enough.
which is not what democracy is supposed to be about. But what you, so the Supreme Court has been huge in the news this week, which has been well, three of the justices on there were appointed by Trump. One was really appointed by Mitch McConnell, but Trump just happened to be the Republican president at the time. Um, so the conservatives have a vast control of the nine court panel. They've been, it seems like they're doing things to help Donald Trump. Do you think that because the big case that's been delayed now for them to make a decision is whether or not the president of the United States, of course, can be charged for a crime that he commits or she commits whilst president? Or do they have immunity if they can claim that it somehow is some sort of, well, just, yeah, do they have broad immunity for every single act they commit as president? Which seems not right. I don't know. Do you feel like
Well,
we should have a president who can commit any crime that they want and
Well,
assassinate?
it's a bit worrying when the president who's asking them to rule is Donald Trump, who's on record as saying, "I'm your retribution," and
Yeah.
and has made no secret. I mean, he's a liar in so many ways, but in other ways, he just tells you exactly who he
Yeah.
is, honestly and openly, every day. It's an interesting question. I mean, no one is above the law, and it's never. And the one time it was really a question previous to this was during the Watergate era,
Yeah.
and I'm making a program that will go out in August to mark the 50th anniversary of Richard Nixon's resignation. Now
Wow.
he wasn't even put through the process of an impeachment trial.
Yeah.
But it was very clear that he had broken the law while in office. He
Mm.
obstructed justice by lying to investigators about what happened during the burglary, who authorized it, was hush money paid, all of this stuff. And so that's the one precedent. And it didn't even get to the Supreme Court. It was just understood. Everybody who was in Congress understood. Only once the tapes came out, and it was
Hmm.
clear that he had been saying, "I didn't know. I had no idea this was going on under my nose." He recorded the meetings where it was all being discussed, and he was an active participant. And you think, all right, well, that's a precedent. And now you have Donald Trump. And the request uh, to rule that he has broad immunity was shot down by a
Mm.
five-man panel in federal district court that was mostly appointed by Republican presidents, the
Yeah.
five judges. And they not only it just threw they didn't throw it out. They essentially very tersely said, "This is not viable,
Mm.
and it's a unanimous, and go away with this argument, this specious argument that you're
Yeah.
above the law." So then he appealed it to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court should look at the next court down, the federal district court, and said, "Well, this is what they said. So actually, we're not going to hear it." That would
Mm.
be to contradict our colleagues who are one level down in the federal judiciary. And most of the liberal commentariat was pretty sure that's what they would do.
Yeah.
And this goes to show, if you get your news from Twitter and follow the liberals or follow the apostate Republicans like Ron Filipkowski, you will be disappointed in this life. Always remember who sits on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, justice is no longer blind. Justice wears a MAGA hat. And that's just been clear for a while now.
Well, I think Roe v. Wade, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, where they all said, "Oh no, precedent matters," and the fact that just Clarence Thomas's wife was a participant in the insurrection. That's typically a red flag. Is that your experience of
It,
journalism?
I my it's only a two-syllable, six-letter word, but recuse, is it used to be an honorable thing.
Yeah.
He should recuse himself, or John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, should look at him and say, "Look, you can't rule on this. You simply can't." But then what does he say to others who were appointed, by Trump?
Yeah.
what does he say to Amy Conehead? It's really terrible. I should Amy Coney Barrett. Everybody calls her Amy Conehead Barrett on Twitter, and you think, oh, it's so immature, and yet I can't. I don't know.
It's like
What does
Ron,
yeah,
yeah, like Ron DeSanctimonious. That's stuck
yeah,
in my
Ron
head.
DeSantis, exactly.
Which,
Neil
yeah,
Gorsuch. What are they going to do? Who ultimately do they owe loyalty to for their positions?
but the whole
And
point
for
of having
that,
the lifetime appointment is that you're not supposed to show any loyalty. You're supposed to be able to
it,
say. But I think that, well, I mean, obviously Brett Kavanaugh probably has such a huge chip on his shoulder because of the way he feels he was treated in his confirmation hearings.
mm,
He probably is happy to stick it to the liberals every time he can.
but having just dismissed and been dismissive of people with far bigger platforms than I have on Twitter, and probably far more listeners on their podcasts than I have, I'm I am going to say that the current thinking is that what they're doing is slow walking the
Yeah,
process, which makes that actually makes more sense to me than that they're going to, completely overturn the lower court's decision that Trump has no status to ask for this kind of immunity. Slow walking is one of my favorite political bureaucratic terms. Well, we got this thing, we don't really want it, but it's passed. But if we take 6 months to get it signed,
yeah,
we'll be in a new electoral cycle. It'll never go into law. I'm just going to slow walk this. We just passed it out of committee, but it could take 3 months before it gets to the floor of the entire Senate for a vote.
yeah.
And that's what's going on. They'll hear arguments around Easter, then they'll go away for at least 3.5, 4 months to make a decision, and maybe longer. They might wait out the term, wait till the first Tuesday in October when the autumn term starts, and then give a decision. But by then it's too late
Yeah,
um, to do anything about it. There'll be no trial, no
there'll be no
testimony,
time. I mean,
and
if they
won't be a
say
factor
that,
at that point.
but if they come back and they say, actually, no, the president does have immunity from criminal prosecution, um, to what Trump is asking for and what the Supreme Court might be saying is they don't currently have the White House. I mean, even though there's a lot of people who say that Trump won, those same, the Republicans in power say, but we accept that Biden is the president. So that gives Biden some room if he'd like to take out a few Supreme Court justices, take out, I mean, they're basically saying, yeah, because that was one of the questions that was posed. Could you order SEAL Team 6 to kill your opponent? And Trump's lawyer said essentially yes. So maybe Biden wants this.
Yeah, Joe's just not that kind of guy. You know it, and I know it. You
I bet
know it,
he
I
would he
know
would assassinate you while he was eating an ice cream. That's what he would do.
it. He eats
He
ice cream because he never drinks. Alcoholism runs in his family, addiction runs in his family, and he's a well-known teetotaler.
hmm,
So when other guys feel stress and need to have a shot of whiskey, Joe goes to the corner and he gets himself a cream cone. And who can blame him?
yeah.
I get it. I get where he's coming from. But yeah, they could say that. The thing is that they could. And then we're just in a completely different kind of situation.
Hmm,
And I I don't know what to do. And I would say, the Republicans have written a template for modern Democrat. It's an oxymoron, democratic authoritarianism. That is to say,
hmm,
you're democratically elected, but you act in an authoritarian way. And even when they lose, which they do,
hmm,
they win. I mean,
yeah,
right now, just as an example, Trump lost, and yet he is conducting, on a couple of critical issues, he's actually conducting foreign policy.
yeah,
Now, it used to be that it was understood that foreign policy really was the prerogative of the president, because you can't be the global hegemon. It wasn't always, there was always debate about it. But once the US became a superpower, I mean, really, you can't have, some senator from Podunk State running foreign policy. You just can't.
Yeah.
And maintain American security. Yet, right now, American policy towards Ukraine is being run from Mar a Lago.
Mm.
Trump has made it impossible for Congress to provide funding to Ukraine at this critical juncture where it really needs money to buy weapons. Most of the weapons, by the way, are supplied by the U.S. So it's like it's a virtuous circle. We'll give Zelensky $50 billion, and he'll spend $40 billion of it with American arms manufacturers. So
Yeah.
at one level, you think, well, who's hurting whom? But Trump, it's documented, has told the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, not to pass any budgets that include funding for Ukraine, and not to pass budgets that include funding for border security, because he wants the border to be a mess in October when he's running for president.
Yeah.
Everybody knows it, and yet they've been successful. There's very little that the Democrats, Biden, can do. The president is really hamstrung here. So, at one level, they exercise power that they haven't got or
Mm.
haven't earned at the ballot box. So, they're already subverting democracy in a very serious way. So, the Supreme Court would just be throwing fuel on the fire if they said, oh, and by the way, the president can do whatever he likes because the president is above the law. And that just doesn't work in American style democracy.
It's not meant to, considering the whole country was founded, overthrowing the power of a king to
Yeah, and
suddenly,
and and then the
to
example
embrace
and
it.
the precedent. I mean, every once in a while you do go back and read the founding fathers, despite the fact that most of them owned slaves. I don't care. Those were the days. You read
Uh,
George Washington's letters about stepping down, resigning the
mm,
presidency. The people, I mean, a popular opinion would have been George Washington should not step down. What will happen to the country?
yeah.
If he's going to step down after 2 terms as president. And remember, there wasn't universal suffrage. I mean, you had to be a white male property owner in order to vote. So, I mean, it wasn't like everybody was voting.
No.
But people would say, George, you want to stay and do a third term? Be my guest. Four
Yeah.
terms, 5 terms. It'll save us the hassle of wondering whether we can transfer power peacefully.
Mm.
And you read his letters, what Washington thought, and he's very articulate about the role of the chief executive, the president. What president wasn't even the term which they first thought of. It just ended up being the term that was used, presiding officer, I guess. And Washington said, no, this is not the point. Was
Mm.
not to transfer one aristocratic organization of society to another. The idea is, citizens compete and whatever, and it's almost impossible to consider. Excuse me. It's almost impossible to imagine that ultimately the Supreme Court would rule in Trump's favor
Yeah.
and say that the chief executive has these kinds of autocratic, above the law powers.
I
But
think, yeah.
yeah,
I I mean, I think they are slow walking it. They are giving him that grace and that time, but also they could have stepped in a number of times when he protested about the election when he was still in office, and then around January 6th and around the Supreme Court had its opportunity to meddle in the election, and they chose not to. So I think that they're giving Trump that grace and that space, probably because they're also scared of his supporters trying to kill them. Um, so for whatever reasons, they're giving him that room. But yes, it seems like they could have stepped in other ways and given him power. So hopefully they do the right thing, even if belatedly. Do you think on the other side where Trump's been winning in the court of opinion on the courts on that side, but at the same time, he lost bigly, I believe is the Trump term, in his fraud case in New York. It's up to $550,000 with $1 million with interest. He's put forward an option to appeal it. He has to pay that money. He said he basically, he said in court papers, apparently, that he can't pay the money without selling assets. Do you think if that's coming true, that to show that he brags about having, do you think not having the millions that he says he does, what do you think that impact is going to have on his brand?
His brand. Um, it's a weird thing. I mean, I think he's down to his. I mean, I'm on his mailing list. I don't know about you, Eric.
Yeah,
I
yeah, of
get
course. I
17
don't. I
solicit
donate all the profits from this podcast go directly to Donald Trump. So you're
17,
facilitating.
18 emails a day, not just from him, but from the
Yeah.
kids and from Carrie Lake, who wants to be his vice presidential nominee. Look, I don't know. I read last week, and it may or may not be true, that he isn't obligated in New York State under New York State law to sell assets. I don't know what will happen. I think that there's a way of delaying actual payment, and these big judgments, you do wonder. It's like Alex Jones, who
Hmm.
was liable for in excess of $1 billion in
Yeah.
claims from the families of the Sandy Hook children who were murdered, and who he said,
Made it up and all
it
that.
made
Yeah.
it up. Yeah, it was whatever. And he declared bankruptcy. He's never paid a penny.
Yeah.
And in the long run, I think if it if if he loses in November again, that he'll declare bankruptcy once
Yeah.
it's all over, and just shelter that money, and it'll never be paid.
Hmm.
It may well be that there will be forfeiture of the house of the big buildings that he actually owns, as opposed to the big buildings that he doesn't own but has licensing rights on. So it says Trump,
Yeah.
because he got out of owning things a long time ago,
Yeah.
actually.
Because his
Um,
brand is the best brand in the universe.
right?
There's no
His
better
brand.
brand.
There is no other brand.
It's the
MAGA,
best.
Trump, you know.
You know.
Um, eh, I think that's more likely to happen. And the thing is that in 2016, October 2016, I was in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. This doesn't make me unique. Virtually every political reporter in America went to Johnstown. Here's an inside tip, people, why. Johnstown is about a 3-hour drive from Washington, D.C. So you can get to a Rust Belt city, right? If
Yeah.
you get up at 6 o'clock, be in a Rust Belt city by 9:30, have all of your tape in the can by lunchtime, and be back in Washington editing and make the 6:30 news with your deep, insightful research on, what unemployed steel workers think about Donald Trump. They aren't there anymore anyway. Um, so I was in Johnstown, and I was walking by the old Bethlehem Steel plant. I was making something for BBC Radio 4. And I
Hmm.
thought, well, I'll do a stand up in the street. I'll just make something up. It might not make my final documentary, but at least whatever. And Johnstown is dead. I have to tell you, it really never recovered from deindustrialization. Its population is, it's Appalachian and poor.
Yeah.
And I see a guy overhear a guy roughly my age, talking to two people roughly your age, young enough to be his kids. And they are, in fact, his kids.
Hmm.
And he's saying, when I came back from Vietnam, this is what I heard from the other side of the street, because there's nothing happening in the street. He was talking in a normal voice. It was the only sound. Okay. And he's saying, when I came back from Nam, this is, I worked here and blah, blah, blah. And then, we had you, and he pointed to the woman, and, then whatever. And so I just wandered over, and I wasn't hiding anything. I had my tape recorder out, sound machine. There's no tape anymore. My sound machine out, and said, "Hey, how you doing? Whatever. I'm making this program for the BBC and so on and so forth. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it over here. What you were saying. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" And we started a very nice talk, and I got really good interviews with them that made my piece. And the guy my age who'd been in Vietnam, military police like
Hmm.
Jack Reacher, and a pretty right-wing dude, I have to say, gets into it with his kids who are
Hmm.
in their late 30s. I'm not voting for Trump. They said, we're voting for Trump. He's a
Hmm.
Christian man. He's not a Christian man. He's a
Yeah.
monster. And this went back and forth. And I thought, now this is really very interesting.
Mm.
And I had met other people who were in Johnstown. Almost all came at politics through Christian politics,
Yeah.
whether Catholic and being anti abortion or, you know, some kind of evangelical, Protestantism. And they were all for Trump. I said, but he's so ungodly. Come on. And they knew that, but they didn't care because he was going to appoint Supreme Court justices,
Yeah.
which he did, and basically was going to discomfort the the libs. He was going
Mm.
to own the libs, which he did. Okay. And I titled the documentary The Unswayables because it was
Mm.
clear to me that if these were the decisions that were that people were making in politics now, not bread and butter issues,
Yeah.
not issues of war and peace, the things that used to be what Americans voted on,
Yeah.
then nothing would ever sway them. Anyway, I stayed in touch with the younger people in that conversation. And after he won, I did go back, I met with them in Virginia a couple of times,
Mm.
actually, just to keep checking in on them, even as his presidency clearly went off the rails and he was not fit.
Mm.
No way they were going to walk away from
Wow.
him. And so when I think of this upcoming election, I think of that core of unswayable
Hmm.
Trump supporters. It doesn't matter what. Yeah, he's got. Oh, you mean he wasn't really a billionaire? You mean he can barely raise funds to pay this fine? This fine is completely politically motivated anyway. I don't care. And if he
Yeah.
isn't a billionaire, I don't care. He's Donald Trump. I support him. He sees the world the way I do. He agrees with me. He, this is it.
Wow. I mean, I was going to ask you as a final question, because to relate to your podcast, the first rough draft of history, um, what would be your way of describing that? But I think in a way, what you've just said kind of does describe. If you were writing this moment, it sounds like that would be part of it because the unswayables are foundational into what's happening in America right now, and that core that just doesn't go away. So I don't know if you. It feels like you've answered a question I haven't even asked you yet by saying that. I don't know if you would agree with that. But
Yeah, well, I mean, when people ask, I'm going over in April, and I'm going back again, probably in late May, early June, to make this thing about Richard Nixon, and I'll know better. But there's very little that's happened. I mean, this is what's interesting. I mean, 2016 was really freaky. It was really
mm,
freaky because, I could see that there was a really strong chance he would win. But
yeah.
like a lot of people say, oh, come on, America's not, I mean, America's crazy, but not that crazy.
Oh
And,
no.
it
Yes,
turns
we
out
are.
it's that
We
crazy,
are.
you know. Um, but very little has changed except his takeover of the Republican Party, which I find really fascinating.
Mm,
And the Republican and the playbook for taking over the Republican Party is now being used by the Tories. I mean, they all
yeah.
go to Heritage Foundation, for long weekends in Washington, or like Liz Truss last week, they go to CPAC and sound like they've been watching One America News Network because they somehow think the lessons of American democratic authoritarianism can be applied here. Luckily, they can't yet. But anyway, no, I genuinely think that the rough draft of history, which I launched at the same time I was in Johnstown.
Mm,
And then, I thought it was going to be about all kinds of stuff. The stories I'd covered, Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Iraq, and a whole bunch of other things that I've reported on. And I couldn't get away from Trump. Every time I tried to get out, he pulled me back in. And then I started when after October 7th slaughter in Israel, I started a first rough draft of history Substack, I thought,
Mm.
well, it's a reasonable thing. And every time I think I can leave Israel and Hamas alone, they pull me back in.
Yeah.
It's it's a drag, man. I, I really want to do something else. I mean, with my Substack, I don't want to. Yeah, I want to do something
Yeah.
else. I want to be an investment banker. I want to finally make some money, man. But that's different.
Well, you could try and become a cyclist. That could be.
I'm already a psychopath. I mean, a psychopath.
Now that they've got all those nice bike lanes in London.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming back on, Michael. And I will plug both your podcast and Substack in the outro of things that we record. But thank you so much. It was lovely to talk to you again.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thank you very much.
So there we go. Thank you to Michael once again for coming on. It's great to have the perspective of someone who takes a little bit of a longer view of the political events of the day and applies them both to a US context and a British context. I think his stuff where he's talking about reporting from 2016 in the front lines and meeting some Trump supporters and keeping in touch with them is really interesting. And that concept of people who are just so married to their opinion that they are unswayable, that they basically have said this is their stake, this is who they're going to stand, and whether the emperor has clothes or not, we're happy to look at him even if he is naked and has a mushroom shaped willy, which according to Stormy Daniels, Donald Trump very much does. So always an interesting person to talk to. Michael is great. Make sure to check out his podcast, The First Rough Draft of History, and his Substack as well, which is under his name. You can find it all online, of course. And so thank you to him for coming in not in. Nothing's in anymore. We just dial into each other's houses. Thank you for coming on again. And thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe, review, do all those kinds of things that are meant to be happening. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.